The year is the 79th of the Common Era, and the deep, unrelenting winter has settled over the northern frontier of the Roman Empire. Here, on the edge of the known world, where the thick forests of Germania meet the gray, churning waters of the Rhine, the air has turned into a heavy, crystalline weight. It is a time of profound stillness. The world outside the camp walls has been erased by a soft, white oblivion, a continuous descent of snowflakes so large and so slow that they seem to drift through the air like the feathers of 1,000 silent birds. There is no wind to disturb them, no breeze to whirl them into chaotic patterns. They simply fall, one by one, landing with an infinitesimal, unheard weight upon the frozen earth, the sharpened stakes of the palisade, and the thick, oiled leather of the legionary tents. Inside the camp of the Legio IX Hispana, the usual clamor of iron against iron, the barking of orders, and the rhythmic thud of marching boots have all been swallowed by the snow. The silence is absolute, a thick velvet blanket that hushes the very soul. It is a silence that invites rest, a silence that demands the cessation of movement. Outside the leather tent of the third contubernium, the snow has begun to pile against the base of the heavy hide walls. The tent, a sturdy construction of goat-skin leather, meticulously stitched together by hand, hums with a low, vibrant energy as it resists the cold. The leather is thick, dark with the oils used to keep it supple and waterproof. If one were to lean close, they would see the intricate grain of the hide, the tiny pores and the slight variations in color where the sun of the previous summer had tanned it. Now, however, it is cold to the touch, a barrier between the freezing void of the Germanic night and the small, flickering pocket of warmth within. The snow settles on the sloped roof of the tent, sliding down in slow, rhythmic intervals, creating a soft, muffled thud as it hits the growing drifts below. It is a sound so regular, so predictable, that it becomes a form of percussion for the sleeping mind, a metronome for the descent into slumber. Inside, the space is small, intimate, and filled with the rich, heavy scents of wood smoke, damp wool, and the faint, metallic tang of oiled bronze. The air is thick, warmed by the collective breath of 8 men and the steady, low glow of a single bronze oil lamp suspended from the central ridge pole. The flame is tiny, a mere teardrop of light that dances with a slow, hypnotic rhythm, casting long, soft shadows that stretch and shrink against the leather walls. The wick, made of braided flax, sizzles almost imperceptibly as it draws up the thick olive oil, a scent that carries memories of the warm, sun-drenched hills of the south, now so very far away. The light it provides is not bright, but it is enough to illuminate the textures of their world. The rough weave of the heavy woolen cloaks, the smooth, worn surface of the wooden tent poles, and the dull sheen of the stacked shields resting in the corner. The floor of the tent has been meticulously prepared for the night. First, a thick layer of dry straw was spread across the frozen ground, providing a crunching, insulating buffer against the rising chill of the earth. Over this, several heavy hides, shaggy bearskins and coarse deer hides, have been laid out, their fur matted and warm. The men of the contubernium move with a practiced, slow deliberation. There is no need for speech. The day's work is done. The perimeter has been checked. The evening meal of thick grain pottage has been consumed, and the only task remaining is the preservation of heat. They move in a coordinated, silent dance, a ritual of preparation that has been repeated every night since the first frost touched the trees. One by one, they remove their heavy military sandals, the caligy, the thick leather laces being untied with slow, stiff fingers. The sound of the leather creaking as it is loosened is the only noise in the tent, a rhythmic scratching that signals the transition from the soldier's life to the sleeper's rest. The sandals are placed neatly in a row near the entrance, their iron-studded soles pointing toward the cold. Next come the tunics, heavy wool dyed a deep, earthy red, now faded by sweat and sun. They are folded with care and placed beneath the head to serve as pillows, the fabric smelling of wood smoke and the faint, lingering scent of dried herbs. The men begin to arrange themselves on the floor, a jigsaw puzzle of human warmth. They lie side by side, shoulder to shoulder, hip to hip. The arrangement is precise, born of necessity and centuries of tradition. They are the contubernium, the tent sharers, and in the heart of winter, their greatest resource is not their swords or their shields, but the heat generated by their own bodies. The first man lies down at the far end of the tent, his back against the leather wall, cushioned by his cloak. The second man lies beside him, his front pressed against the first man's back, his knees tucked slightly to fit the curve of the body before him. This continues until all 8 men are nestled together, a single, undulating mass of wool and warmth. Across their legs and torsos, they pull the great collective blanket. It is not a single piece of fabric, but a series of heavy, rectangular woolen cloaks, the sagum buttoned and tucked together to form one continuous heavy layer. The wool is thick and coarse, woven with a density that traps the air and holds the heat close to the skin. It feels heavy, a comforting weight that pins the body to the earth and signals to the nervous system that it is safe to let go. The color of the wool is a dark charcoal gray, almost black in the dim light of the oil lamp. As they pull the blanket up to their chins, the sound of the wool dragging across their tunics is a soft, shushing noise, like the sound of distant surf. The air beneath the blanket begins to warm almost immediately. It is a slow, creeping warmth that starts where their bodies touch and spreads outward, soaking into the limbs and softening the muscles. The cold of the Germanic night, though only inches away on the other side of the leather, feels like a distant memory. Inside this small, shared space, the only reality is the rhythmic rise and fall of chests, the steady heartbeat of the group, and the hypnotic flicker of the lamp. One soldier, Lucius, who lies near the center of the row, feels the steady warmth of his comrade Marcus against his back, and the equally steady warmth of Decimus against his chest. He can hear the slow, deep intake of their breath, a synchronized cadence that begins to pull his own breathing into alignment. He focuses on the texture of the wool against his neck, the slight prickle of the fibers, and the way it traps the heat of his own skin. He watches the shadows move on the ceiling of the tent. A small drop of condensation, formed by their breath hitting the cold leather, hangs suspended from a seam. It catches the light of the lamp, glowing like a tiny, liquid diamond. He watches it for a long time, observing the way it trembles slightly with the vibration of their breathing, but does not fall. The silence outside deepens. The snow continues its tireless descent, adding inch after inch to the world's white shroud. The camp is a city of ghosts, a collection of leather peaks lost in the gloom. But here, inside the tent, the world is small, safe, and warm. The logistics of survival have been reduced to this: the sharing of breath, the layering of wool, and the absolute stillness of the body. There is no tomorrow, no yesterday, only the present moment of heat and the soft, repetitive sound of the snow sliding off the roof. The mind begins to drift, untethered from the concerns of the legion, floating into the gray spaces between wakefulness and sleep. The flickering lamp is the last thing Lucius sees before his eyelids become too heavy to hold, the tiny flame a golden spark in a world of deepening, cozy shadows. He feels the weight of the blanket, the warmth of his brothers in arms, and the profound, boring peace of the winter night. The rhythmic breathing of the 8 men becomes a single sound, a low hum that vibrates through the straw and the hides, grounding them to the earth. The smell of the oil lamp begins to fade as the oil runs low, the scent of the flax wick becoming more prominent, a dry, toasted smell that is oddly comforting. The darkness in the tent grows more profound as the flame sinks lower into the bronze reservoir. The shadows on the walls lose their sharp edges, becoming soft, blurry shapes that blend into the dark leather. Everything is slowing down. The pulse of the men, the flicker of the light, the very passage of time itself seems to stretch and expand, turning minutes into hours of motionless comfort. The cold outside is a physical presence, a silent sentinel guarding the perimeter of their warmth, but it cannot enter. The one blanket rule is in effect, a pact of shared heat that ensures each man will wake to the gray light of dawn, his blood still moving, his heart still beating, protected by the simple, monotonous, and beautiful necessity of human proximity. The leather of the tent creaks slightly as a heavier drift of snow settles upon the ridge pole. It is a low, groaning sound, the sound of a structure doing its job, holding firm against the elements. Inside, not a single man stirs. They are locked in the embrace of the collective, their individual identities submerged into the warmth of the contubernium. The straw beneath them shifts minutely, settling into the shape of their bodies, creating 8 perfect nests within the larger whole. The heavy wool of the sagum cloaks, damp with the moisture of the air but glowing with the heat of the men, provides a sanctuary of texture and weight. Every detail, the scratch of the wool, the scent of the wood smoke, the sight of the dying lamp, serves to anchor them in this moment of absolute, boring, and hypnotic safety. As the last glimmer of the oil lamp finally vanishes, leaving the tent in a state of soft, velvety darkness, the silence of the snow outside seems to seep through the leather, not as cold, but as a deeper layer of quiet. The 8 men, bound by the one blanket rule, are now fully surrendered to the night. Their journey through the winter is not one of movement, but of stillness, a slow, methodical endurance of the cold through the simple, repetitive act of staying warm together. The story of the night is written in the condensation on the leather, the settling of the straw, and the slow, rhythmic breathing that will continue, unchanged and unhurried, until the sun struggles to rise over the frozen Rhine. The darkness that followed the extinguishing of the small bronze lamp was not a void, but rather a thick, velvet presence that seemed to press gently against the eyelids of the 8 men. In the absence of light, their other senses expanded, becoming hyper-aware of the microenvironment within the leather walls of the tent. The air, now seasoned with the faint, toasted aroma of the spent flax wick felt heavier and more insulating. The scent of the olive oil lingered as a ghostly memory, a thin, floral trail that wove through the more dominant smells of earth, aged leather, and the deep, musk-like warmth of the heavy woolen sagum cloaks. Beneath the great communal blanket, the heat had reached a state of perfect equilibrium. It was a stagnant, nurturing warmth that felt almost liquid, flowing into every gap between the bodies of the soldiers. Lucius, lying near the center of the row, could feel the precise point where his right shoulder pressed against the sturdy, woolen-clad back of Marcus. The texture of the wool was a study in subtle variation. It was a heavy, dense weave, crafted by weavers who understood the brutal necessity of the northern frontier. Each thread was thick and slightly coarse, containing the natural oils of the sheep, the lanolin that acted as a natural barrier against the dampness of the Germanic air. As Lucius moved his arm a fraction of an inch, he could feel the individual fibers of the wool catch and release against the fabric of his own tunic. It was a slow, rhythmic friction, a sound like a distant, dry rustle that existed only within the confines of their shared space. The blanket itself was a masterpiece of military logistics and communal survival. Formed by the overlapping and fastening of 8 individual cloaks, it was a heavy, multi-layered shield against the encroaching frost. The weight of it was significant. It pressed down upon their legs and torsos with a steady, reassuring gravity. This weight served a dual purpose. It trapped the rising heat of their bodies against the straw bedding, and it provided a sensory anchor that stilled the restless mind. To feel the weight of the wool was to know that one was protected, that the boundary between the self and the freezing night was thick and impenetrable. The men's feet were tucked together at the bottom of the row, a cluster of warmth encased in extra layers of wool and hides. The soles of their feet, hardened by miles of marching along the Roman roads, now rested against the soft, yielding fur of a large bearskin that had been laid across the foot of the sleeping area. The fur was deep and dense, its individual hairs creating millions of tiny pockets of air that held the heat with remarkable efficiency. Every time a man shifted a toe, the fur would compress and then slowly spring back, a silent, tactile response to the smallest of movements. This interaction between the human body and the natural materials of their shelter was a constant, monotonous dialogue of comfort. Outside, the snow continued its relentless, silent labor. The weight of it on the tent's exterior had increased, causing the leather to stretch and settle with a series of low, groaning creaks. These sounds were not alarming. They were the structural language of the tent, a confirmation of its strength. The leather, tanned with oak bark and rubbed with tallow until it was as supple as cloth but as tough as iron, hummed under the pressure. The sound of the snow hitting the hide had changed from a light tapping to a soft, muffled thud, as the layers of white powder grew thicker. It was as if the tent were being slowly encased in a cocoon of ice and silence, further isolating the 8 men from the world of the living. The logistics of their position were a matter of instinct and long-standing tradition. The one blanket rule required a certain degree of stillness. To move too abruptly would be to invite a draft of cold air into the warm pocket they had created. Thus, every movement was performed with an extreme languid slowness. If a man needed to shift his weight, he did so in a gradual roll, feeling the heat move with him, ensuring that the seal of the wool remained intact. This collective stillness created a hypnotic atmosphere. The only constant was the breathing, a slow, deep, and synchronized rhythm that filled the tent. Lucius focused on the sound of the breathing. It was a low, undulating wave of sound. There was the sharp, slightly raspy intake of breath from Decimus on his left, followed by the long, smooth exhale from Marcus on his right. The sounds overlapped, creating a tapestry of respiration that felt like the pulse of a single, large organism. In the absolute darkness, the breathing became a landscape of its own, a series of peaks and valleys of sound that the mind could wander through without ever reaching an end. It was a boring, repetitive sound, and in its repetition lay its power to soothe. The straw beneath the hides also played its part in the nightly symphony of the contubernium. As the men breathed and shifted, the dry stalks of grain moved minutely, creating a series of tiny, brittle snaps and rustles. It was the sound of the earth settling, a dry, golden noise that contrasted with the damp, heavy silence of the snow outside. The straw had been gathered from the fields of a nearby settlement during the late autumn, dried in the sun until it was brittle and fragrant. Now, even in the depths of winter, it retained a faint scent of the harvest, a dry, dusty smell that spoke of sunlight and growth, providing a psychological warmth that was as important as the physical heat. The passage of time had lost all meaning. Without the sun to mark the hours, and with the oil lamp long extinguished, the night became an undifferentiated expanse of rest. The men were suspended in a state of pure being, their consciousness narrowed down to the immediate sensations of their environment. The cold was a theoretical concept, something that existed elsewhere, on the other side of the dark leather. Here, inside the one blanket, there was only the texture of the wool, the scent of the straw, and the steady, unhurried warmth of 8 human hearts beating in unison. Occasionally, a small fleck of dried mud would fall from a hanging piece of equipment, perhaps a shield strap or a leather satchel, landing on the wool with a sound so faint it was more a vibration than a noise. These tiny events were the only markers of the passing night. The world of politics, of the emperor in Rome, of the movements of the Germanic tribes, all of it had vanished. The reality of the legionary had been reduced to the most basic, most fundamental elements of survival: shelter, warmth, and the presence of his brothers. Lucius felt a deep, heavy languor spreading through his limbs. His fingers, which had been slightly stiff from the day's labor of hauling timber, were now soft and warm, tucked into the folds of his tunic. He could feel the pulse in his own fingertips, a steady throb that seemed to syncopate with the breathing of the others. The boundary between his body and the air around him had blurred. He felt as though he were melting into the warmth, becoming part of the very fabric of the tent. The air near the ceiling of the tent was warmer than the air near the floor, and as it cooled against the leather, it would slowly descend in a gentle, almost imperceptible current. This movement of air was a soft caress against any exposed skin, a cheek, a forehead, the tip of a nose. It was a cool contrast to the deep heat beneath the blanket, a reminder of the vast, frozen world that lay just beyond their reach. The condensation on the seams of the tent continued to grow, the droplets of water swelling until they were heavy enough to track slowly down the slope of the leather. The sound of a single drop sliding, a microscopic wet hiss, was audible in the profound quiet. The men's equipment, stacked neatly in the corners of the tent, stood as silent sentinels. The curved rectangular shields, the skuta, were faced inward, their wooden bodies and iron bosses catching no light but occupying space with a heavy, solid presence. The javelins, the pila, were bundled together, their iron points cold and still. This equipment was the reason they were here, the tools of their trade, but in the heart of the night they were merely objects, as inanimate as the stones of the Rhine. The focus was entirely on the biological, the living, the warm. The one blanket rule was more than just a survival tactic. It was a ritual of trust. To sleep so close to another is to be entirely vulnerable, and in that vulnerability there was a profound sense of peace. Each man knew that his warmth was being used by his neighbor, just as he was using the warmth of the man beside him. It was a closed system of energy, a perfect circle of preservation. The monotony of this existence, the same faces, the same smells, the same cold, the same ritual of sleep, was not a burden but a comfort. It was the predictable nature of their lives that allowed them to let go of the world and descend into the deep, heavy sleep of the soldier. As the night deepened, the snow outside reached a height that began to press in on the lower walls of the tent. This added a new layer of insulation, a thick wall of frozen water that further dampened any sound from the outside world. Even the sound of the occasional owl or the distant howl of a wolf was now completely barred from the tent. They were in a sensory deprivation chamber of their own making, a warm, woolen womb in the heart of the Germanic forest. Lucius let his mind drift over the texture of the word winter. In his native tongue it was Heims. It was a sharp, cold word, but here, in the tent, it had been transformed. Here, Heims was the smell of damp wool and the feeling of a heavy blanket. It was the sound of 8 men breathing in the dark. It was the slow, rhythmic settling of straw and the hypnotic groan of leather under the weight of the snow. He found himself counting the breaths, 1, 2, 3, before losing track and starting again. The numbers were meaningless, just another repetitive task to occupy the surface of the mind, while the depths of his consciousness sank further into the soft, gray layers of sleep. The darkness was complete, but it was a friendly darkness. It held no terrors, only the promise of continued rest. The heat remained constant, a steady 37 degrees Celsius, 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit, shared among 8 bodies, creating a microclimate that defied the sub-zero temperatures of the northern frontier. The one blanket was their world, their fortress, and their bed. And within that world, there was nothing to do but exist, to breathe, and to wait for the slow, inevitable return of the light. The silence of the tent was now so profound that the sound of a man swallowing or the rustle of a woolen sleeve felt like significant events. These sounds were processed by the sleeping mind and woven into the fabric of their dreams, dreams of warm Italian hillsides, of the smell of baking bread, of the sun reflecting off the Mediterranean. But even these dreams were slow and low stakes, simple loops of memory that required no effort and caused no distress. The overarching reality remained the tent, the blanket, and the shared heat. The deep, heavy middle of the night has arrived, that suspended hour where time seems to fold in on itself, and the distinction between the physical world and the world of dreams becomes as thin as a single thread of wool. Within the leather walls of the contubernium's tent, the microclimate created by the 8 men has reached its zenith. The temperature beneath the communal blanket, the vast, heavy expanse of the joined saga, is now a constant, radiating bloom of heat that defies the freezing vacuum of the Germanic forest outside. This heat is not just a physical sensation. It is a living thing, a shared commodity that circulates slowly from skin to skin, heart to heart, trapped by the density of the wool and the thick, oiled layers of the goatskin roof. Looking closely at the internal structure of the tent in the absolute gloom, one would see the intricate details of Roman engineering meeting the raw necessity of survival. The central ridge pole, carved from a sturdy branch of northern ash, stands as a silent sentinel in the dark. The wood is smooth, polished by years of handling and the friction of being packed and unpacked from the backs of mules. Under the weight of the accumulating snow outside, the pole groans with a low-frequency vibration, a sound so deep it is felt in the marrow of the men's bones rather than heard by their ears. It is a comforting sound, the sound of a structural spine holding firm against the weight of the winter. Along the seams of the leather, where the thick needles of the camp's craftsmen once pushed through the hide, a delicate and beautiful phenomenon has begun to occur. Despite the warmth of the men, the extreme cold of the exterior has turned the moisture of their collective breath into a fine, crystalline frost. This frost traces the lines of the stitching, creating a ghostly, white embroidery that glimmers faintly in the absence of light. Every so often, a tiny crystal becomes too heavy and detaches, falling through the still air with a sound like a microscopic chime as it lands on the rough surface of a wooden shield. The shields themselves, the scuda, are stacked with a precision that speaks of years of discipline. They are curved rectangles of plywood, faced with leather and rimmed with bronze. In the dark, they occupy the corner of the tent like a sleeping beast. The smell of the wood, poplar and ash mingles with the scent of the hide and the bitter, metallic tang of the iron bosses. Each shield is covered with a protective linen wrap, a coarse fabric that has been soaked in oil to repel the damp. The texture of this linen is rough and slightly tacky to the touch, a detail that Lucius notes as his hand, escaping the warmth of the blanket for a brief moment, brushes against it. The cold of the iron boss radiates a small circle of chill, a sharp contrast to the humid warmth of the sleeping row. Beneath the one blanket, the logistics of the 8-man huddle are a marvel of unconscious cooperation. The men are arranged in what the veterans call the weaver's tuck. Their legs are interlaced at the ankles, creating a solid wall of lower body warmth that prevents any drafts from rising through the gaps in the straw. The heavy woolen cloaks are tucked deep beneath the sides of the outer men, sealing the edges of the huddle like the caulking of a ship's hull. The weight of the wool, perhaps 40 pounds of fabric in total, creates a gentle, constant pressure that suppresses the urge to toss and turn. It is a forced stillness that leads to a deeper, more restorative state of rest. Marcus, lying on the far edge of the row, feels the slight, rhythmic vibration of the earth through the layers of hides and straw. Far off, perhaps at the edge of the camp's palisade. He can sense the muffled footfalls of the night watch. The sound is not a thud, but a soft, crunching vibration that travels through the frozen ground, dampened by 3 feet of snow. It is a reminder that the world still exists, that the Legion is still on guard, but it is a distant reality. Here, in the tent, the only duty is to remain still, to conserve energy, and to allow the body to repair itself after the day's grueling labor of clearing ice from the ramparts. The air they breathe is thick and laden with the sense of their existence. There is the smell of the grain pottage they ate at sunset, a hearty, earthy scent of toasted spelt and salt. There is the smell of the vinegar water, the pasca in their leather canteens, a sharp, acidic note that cuts through the musk of the wool. And above all, there is the smell of the forest itself, a faint, resinous scent of pine and crushed needles that has hitched a ride on their tunics and hair. These scents are not unpleasant. They are the familiar, boring olfactory markers of their daily lives, providing a sense of continuity and safety. As the hours of the deep night pass, the condensation on the leather ceiling begins to grow more pronounced. A single droplet of water formed from the steam of their warmth hangs precariously from the ridge pole. It is a clear, heavy sphere. Slowly, it gathers more moisture, swelling in size. The men beneath it are oblivious to its slow progress. Finally, the laws of gravity overcome the surface tension, and the drop falls. It lands on the heavy woolen blanket with a soft plip, a sound so quiet it would be lost in any other environment. The wool absorbs it instantly, the lanolin in the fibers guiding the moisture away from the skin. This small, repetitive cycle of evaporation and condensation is the only clock they have, a liquid metronome marking the passage of the midnight hours. Lucius finds himself focusing on the texture of his own breathing. He notices the way the air feels as it enters his nostrils, slightly cooler than the air beneath the blanket, and the way it feels as it leaves, warm and humid. He begins to time his breaths with the man to his left, Decimus. Inhale 2, 3, 4. Exhale 2, 3, 4. The synchronization of their breathing creates a low, resonant frequency within the tent, a hum of life that seems to vibrate the very air. It is hypnotic, a form of collective meditation that strips away all thought of the future or the past. There is only the breath, the warmth, and the wool. In the corner of the tent, a leather satchel hangs from a peg. Inside, a stylus and a wax tablet rest, the tools of Lucius's secondary duty as a clerk. The wax is currently hard and brittle from the cold. The words he carved into it earlier in the day, lists of grain rations, counts of sharpened steaks, now frozen in place. The thought of the hard, sharp stylus and the resistant wax is a sharp, cold mental image that makes the softness of the blanket feel even more luxurious. He imagines the wax softening in the summer sun, turning into a dark, honey-like pool, and the thought carries him further toward the edge of sleep. The silence of the Germanic winter is a physical weight. It is not just the absence of noise, but a positive presence of quiet. The snow acts as the world's greatest insulator, swallowing the sounds of the trees cracking in the frost, the movement of small animals in the undergrowth, and the flow of the Rhine. This absolute quiet allows the sounds within the tent to take on a monumental quality. The rustle of a man's linen tunic against his skin, the soft click of a tooth, the sound of a heart beating against the straw. These are the only events in their universe. Each sound is a tiny anchor, holding them in the present, preventing their minds from drifting into the cold void outside. The logistics of the one blanket rule also dictate the management of the shared air. The tent's entrance, a double flap of heavy leather, is laced shut with thick thongs of rawhide. However, a small gap is left at the very top of the peak to allow for a minimal exchange of air. Through this tiny aperture, a single, needle-like shaft of freezing air descends. It doesn't reach the men, as the rising heat of their bodies pushes it back, but it creates a slow, invisible whirlpool of air in the upper reaches of the tent. This circulation prevents the air from becoming too stale, keeping it fresh enough to sustain their deep, restorative slumber. Marcus shifts his weight by a fraction of an inch, feeling the way the straw beneath him compresses. The straw is a complex layer of protection. Each individual stalk is a hollow tube, a tiny vessel of trapped air. Multiplied by thousands, the straw becomes a sophisticated thermal barrier, preventing the warmth of the men from being leached away by the frozen earth. The sound of the straw shifting is a dry, golden rustle, a sound that Lucius associates with the safety of the camp. It is a boring sound, a predictable sound, and it signals that everything is as it should be. The men's armor, the larica segmentata, lies in a neat pile near the shields. The iron strips, held together by leather straps and brass fittings, are cold and unyielding. Earlier in the evening, they had been meticulously wiped down with a cloth dipped in oil to prevent the damp air from causing rust. The scent of that oil, a heavy, industrial smell, lingers near the floor. The armor is a reminder of their identity as soldiers, but in this moment, it is merely a collection of cold minerals, a stark contrast to the soft, organic warmth of the men under the wool. The transition from the hard, metallic world of the day to the soft, woolen world of the night is complete. As the middle of the night stretches on, the collective heat of the 8 men begins to soak into the very ground beneath them. The frost in the top inch of the earth beneath the straw begins to thaw, releasing a faint mineral smell, the scent of the deep earth. This smell, combined with the scent of the straw and the wool, creates a rich, complex aroma that is the very essence of the contubernium. It is a smell of survival, of a small pocket of life holding out against the indifferent frozen wilderness. Lucius feels a sense of profound gratitude for the one blanket. It is more than just a piece of equipment. It is a pact. It is the physical manifestation of their brotherhood. As long as they stay together, as long as they share their heat and their breath, the winter cannot touch them. The boredom of the night, the hours of lying still, of listening to the snow, of feeling the weight of the wool, is not a trial but a gift. It is the boredom of safety. The darkness remains absolute, but the men have no need for sight. Their world is defined by touch and sound. The texture of the wool, the warmth of a neighbor's shoulder, the rhythmic sigh of the breathing, these are the coordinates of their existence. The snow continues to fall, adding another layer to the white wall surrounding their tent, further burying them in their cocoon of warmth. The one blanket rule is working, a simple, ancient logistics of the body that ensures another day of life in the service of the empire. The night is long, and the sun is many hours away, but inside the leather walls there is no hurry. The men drift in and out of a shallow, peaceful sleep, always aware of the shared warmth, always anchored by the weight of the saga. The story of the night is a story of stillness, a slow, hypnotic endurance that requires nothing but the ability to stay warm and the willingness to be bored. The deep, heavy silence of the Roman camp in the Germanic wilderness has now reached its absolute peak. It is the time of the third watch, the hour when the world outside the leather walls of the tent is at its coldest, and the stillness is so profound it feels as though the very air has frozen solid. Inside the tent of the third contubernium, the one blanket rule continues its silent, vital work. The 8 men are now so deeply integrated into their shared environment that the boundary between individual and collective has almost entirely vanished. The heat they have generated over the last several hours has saturated the space, creating a dense, humid atmosphere that feels like a warm embrace. It is a slow, monotonous victory over the elements, won not with swords, but with the steady, unhurried persistence of the human body. Lucius, still suspended in that peaceful, gray borderland between sleep and wakefulness, finds his attention drawn to the physical reality of the sagum, the great woolen cloaks that form their communal covering. In the total darkness, the wool is not a color, but a texture and a weight. It is a coarse, heavy fabric, woven from the wool of hardy Italian sheep. He imagines the loom it was created on, the rhythmic clatter of the wooden shuttle passing back and forth, the steady beat of the weaver's comb packing the threads tight. Each thread is a complex structure of fibers, twisted together to create a material that is both breathable and incredibly insulating. The wool still carries the faint, oily scent of lanolin, a natural water repellent that also gives the fabric a slightly tacky, substantial feel. As Lucius breathes, the wool near his face rises and falls with a soft, rhythmic friction, a sound like the world's quietest sigh. The weight of the combined cloaks is a constant, grounding force. It is not a burden but a reassurance. It presses the men into the straw, ensuring that the warm air trapped between their bodies and the hides cannot escape. This pressure has a hypnotic effect on the nervous system, a phenomenon the soldiers have come to rely on during the long winter campaigns. It tells the brain that the body is secure, that the perimeter is closed, and that there is no need for vigilance. The logistics of the blanket are simple but effective. The more weight, the more stillness. The more stillness, the more heat is conserved. It is a boring, repetitive physics of survival that Lucius finds deeply comforting. Beneath the blanket, the arrangement of their limbs has settled into a final, efficient configuration. To maximize heat, the men have tucked their hands into their own armpits or between their thighs, keeping the extremities warm with the core heat of the body. Their feet are a cluster of shared warmth at the bottom of the row, tucked under the extra folds of the cloaks and the shaggy fur of the bearskin. The sensation of a comrade's foot against his own is not an intrusion, but a vital connection. It is a silent dialogue of temperature, a constant exchange of thermal energy that keeps the blood moving in the furthest reaches of their bodies. The monotony of this physical contact, hour after hour, creates a sense of profound safety. Outside, the snow has reached a depth that completely muffles the sound of the wind. Even if a gale were to rise in the forest, The tent is now so low and so encased in white drifts that it would feel nothing but a slight vibration. The snow acts as a secondary layer of insulation, a thick, white wall that traps the heat of the earth beneath the tent. The leather walls, once flexible, are now stiff with the external frost, creating a rigid shell that protects the inhabitants. Every so often, the weight of the snow causes a seam to creak, a slow, dry sound like the stretching of an old parchment. This sound is the only marker of the immense pressure of the winter world pressing in on their small pocket of life. Lucius focuses on the smell of the straw beneath him. It is a dry, dusty scent, with hints of summer sun and the mineral tang of the soil. Each stalk of straw is a hollow tube, a microscopic chamber of air. As the 8 men lie upon it, thousands of these tubes compress and shift, creating a constant, low-level rustle. It is the sound of the bedding conforming to the shape of their bodies, a custom-molded nest that has been perfected over the course of the night. The straw also absorbs the moisture from their breath and the dampness of the air, becoming slightly softer and more fragrant as the night progresses. It is a boring, earthy smell that speaks of the fundamental connection between the soldier and the land he occupies. In the corner of the tent, the small leather water skin, the ampulla, hangs from a wooden peg. The water inside is cold, but because it is inside the tent, it has not frozen. A thin layer of condensation has formed on the outside of the leather, and Lucius can hear the occasional microscopic drip as a bead of moisture falls onto the dry straw below. The sound is so regular and so quiet that it becomes a form of auditory meditation. Drip, pause, drip. It is a tiny, liquid clock, marking the slow, cold hours of the third watch. The thought of the cold, clean water is refreshing, but the effort required to reach for it is too great. The warmth of the blanket is a powerful gravity that holds him in place, a voluntary prisoner of comfort. The men's equipment, though invisible in the dark, occupies the space with a heavy, silent presence. The wooden grain sacks, filled with the measured rations of spelt and barley, sit near the entrance, their fabric rough and smelling of flour. The bronze cooking pot, the patera, rests on the floor, its metal surface cold and smooth. These objects are the pillars of their daily existence, the tools of food and shelter, and their presence provides a sense of order and continuity. Everything has its place, and everything is where it should be. This order is the foundation of the Legion's strength, even in the middle of a frozen forest in Germania. Lucius finds himself imagining the microscopic movement of the heat. He visualizes the warmth radiating from Marcus's chest, passing through the layers of wool, and being absorbed by his own back. He imagines the air molecules slowing down as they hit the cold leather of the ceiling, then being warmed again by the collective breath of the contubernium. This mental image of a closed, circulating system of energy is deeply satisfying. It is a boring, technical way of thinking about survival, but it passes the time. The logistics of heat transfer are far more interesting than the cold reality of the winter, and he lets his mind wander through the physics of the one blanket rule. The silence in the tent is now so thick it feels like a physical substance. It is a silence that has been built layer by layer. The layer of the snow, the layer of the leather, the layer of the wool, and finally the layer of the men's own stillness. Within this silence, every internal sound is magnified. Lucius can hear the soft, rhythmic clicking of a jaw as a man breathes, the rustle of a linen tunic, the slow, steady thud of his own heart. These sounds are the only proof of life in a world that has otherwise been turned to ice. They are small, humble sounds, but in the context of the Germanic night, they are monumental. The one blanket rule also demands a certain psychological discipline. To lie so close to others for so long requires a quiet mind. There is no room for anxiety, no room for the restlessness of the day. The men have learned to let their thoughts drift like the snow outside, slowly, aimlessly, and without purpose. They think of the taste of warm bread, the feel of the sun on their skin, the sound of a distant stream. These are low-stakes thoughts, simple memories that provide a gentle, flickering light in the darkness of the mind. They are the mental equivalent of the small oil lamp, providing just enough warmth to keep the shadows at bay. As the third watch draws to a close, the air in the tent reaches a state of total stagnation. The movement of the air has ceased, leaving a warm, humid stillness that feels as though it has been there for centuries. The condensation on the ceiling has stopped dripping, the moisture now held in a delicate balance between the warmth inside and the cold outside. The 8 men are like insects in amber, preserved in a moment of absolute boring peace. The one blanket is a world unto itself, a woolen universe where the only laws are the laws of heat, and the only requirement is to stay still. Lucius feels a wave of profound drowsiness wash over him, heavier and more insistent than before. The weight of the cloak seems to increase, pinning him to the straw with a gentle, irresistible force. He closes his eyes, though the darkness is the same whether they are open or shut. He focuses on the feeling of the shared warmth, the steady, rhythmic breathing of his brothers in arms, and the slow, hypnotic creak of the tent. The winter is still there, just inches away, but it is a powerless ghost. Inside the tent, the one blanket rule has won. The men are warm, they are safe, and they are deeply, beautifully bored. The story of the night continues to unfold in the smallest of details. The texture of a woolen thread, the scent of a dry straw, the vibration of a distant footfall. These are the things that matter now. The great events of history are far away, irrelevant to the 8 men huddling together for warmth. Their history is the history of the body, the history of survival, and the history of the one blanket. As the last echoes of the third watch fade into the silence of the snow, the men sink deeper into their shared rest, waiting for the first, gray hint of dawn to touch the frozen world. The fourth watch has arrived, the final, deepest segment of the night before the first gray suggestion of dawn begins to thin the darkness. In the Roman camp, this is the hour of the greatest stillness, where the frost is at its most ambitious and the world outside the leather tent is a frozen sculpture of white and shadow. Inside the small sanctuary of the third contubernium, the 8 men remain locked in their collective embrace, bound by the unyielding logic of the one blanket rule. The air inside has reached a state of heavy, humid saturation. It is a thick, nourishing atmosphere, warmed by hours of shared respiration, and the steady, low-frequency hum of 8 hearts beating in a slow, synchronized rhythm. Lucius, drifting in the soft, formless space of the nearly asleep, finds his mind wandering through the physical architecture of their shelter. He contemplates the leather of the tent walls, heavy, oil-treated goat skin that has been their only shield against the Germanic winter for many months. In his mind's eye, he traces the seams where the hides meet. Each stitch was made with a thick, waxed linen thread, pulled tight by a craftsman's hands in a sun-drenched workshop in Gaul. He imagines the needle passing through the tough hide, the resistance of the leather, and the soft snick of the thread being drawn home. Now, in the freezing dark, those stitches are under immense tension as the leather contracts from the cold and the weight of the snow presses down from above. The sound of the leather stretching is a low, intermittent groan, a sound so ancient and predictable that it acts as a lullaby. It is the sound of the tent breathing with them, a rhythmic expansion and contraction that mirrors their own lungs. The weight of the communal blanket, the joined saga, has become almost a part of his own body. He is no longer Lucius, the clerk and soldier. He is a component of a thermal machine. He focuses on the specific sensation of the wool against his jawline. It is a coarse, honest texture. He can feel the individual fibers, thick, wiry hairs from the mountain sheep of the Apennines, pressing against his skin. These fibers are not smooth. They have microscopic scales that lock together, creating a fabric so dense that no draft can penetrate it. He imagines the microscopic pockets of air trapped between these fibers, tiny bubbles of warmth that have been heated by his own blood. This is the secret of the one blanket. It is not just the fabric that keeps them warm, but the stillness of the air it captures. He follows the path of a single woolen thread in his mind, tracing its twists and turns, its intersections with the weft and the warp, until the complexity of the weave becomes a hypnotic labyrinth that leads him deeper toward slumber. To keep his mind from wandering into the cold void of the forest, Lucius begins a mental inventory of the contubernium's equipment, a slow and monotonous task he uses to anchor himself in the boring safety of the present. He starts with the grain sacks stacked near the tent's laced opening. There are 4 of them, heavy linen bags filled with a mixture of spelt and barley. He visualizes the texture of the grain, hard, smooth, teardrop-shaped seeds that clatter like tiny stones when poured. He imagines counting them one by one into a wooden measuring bowl. 1 grain of spelt, 2 grains of spelt, 3. The repetition is a sedative. He thinks of the smell of the raw grain, a dry, dusty, cereal scent that promises the simple comfort of tomorrow's porridge. Next, his mind moves to the tent pegs, the paxilli, which are currently driven deep into the frozen earth outside. He counts them mentally, 10 in total made of seasoned oak, their heads battered by the strike of the mallet. He imagines the way the wood fibers have compressed under the impact, the way the points are wedged into the soil, held fast by the grip of the frost. The pegs are invisible, buried under feet of snow, but their presence is felt in the stability of the tent. They are the anchors of his world. He moves his internal gaze to the leather straps of his sandals, the caligy, lying in the dark near the entrance. He counts the iron studs on the soles, rows of small, blunt mushrooms of metal that have crunched through the mud of Gaul and the dust of Italia, and which now rest in the silent, Germanic dark. The condensation on the ceiling of the tent has reached a point of total equilibrium. The moisture from their breath has formed a thin, shimmering film across the entire underside of the leather. In the absolute darkness, Lucius cannot see it, but he can sense its presence. He hears the occasional, rhythmic tink of a microscopic ice crystal forming at the peak of the tent, where the air is slightly colder. It is a sound so delicate it would be lost to anyone whose ears were not tuned to the profound silence of the night. He imagines the droplets of water merging together, growing heavy, and then sliding with agonizing slowness down the slope of the tent, guided by the natural grain of the leather. This liquid movement is the only motion in their world, a slow, gravity-driven journey that mirrors the slow passage of the hours. The heat beneath the blanket is now so profound that it feels like a physical weight on his limbs. It is a heavy heat, the kind that softens the bones and makes the thought of movement seem like an impossibility. He feels the warmth of Marcus's back against his own chest, a steady, radiating glow that seems to bypass the skin and soak directly into his internal organs. He times his heartbeats to the pulses of warmth he feels from his comrades. Thump, thump, thump. Each beat is a confirmation of life, a small, rhythmic defiance of the winter. The logistics of the one blanket have created a perfect circle of energy. Nothing is wasted, nothing is lost. The heat of 8 men is more than enough to keep the frost at bay, provided they remain still, provided they remain bored. Outside, the snow has begun to fall with even greater intensity, though it remains perfectly silent. The world has been simplified into 2 states, the cold, white exterior and the warm, dark interior. There is no middle ground. The snow is now so high that it has reached the middle of the tent walls, pressing the leather inward. This external pressure is countered by the internal pressure of the warm air and the sturdy wooden poles. This balance of forces is a source of deep, subconscious comfort to Lucius. It is the feeling of being perfectly protected, of being in a space that has been engineered to withstand the worst the world can throw at it. The boredom of the night is a testament to the success of that engineering. Lucius focuses on the scent of the wood smoke that still lingers in the fibers of his tunic. It is a ghost of a smell, a thin, acrid memory of the evening fire that was extinguished hours ago. It is a comforting scent, associated with food, light, and the companionship of the Legion. Mixed with it is the smell of the damp earth, the mineral tang of the soil that has been slightly thawed by the heat of their bodies through the layers of straw and hides. This scent is heavy and grounding, a reminder that they are literally cradled by the earth. He imagines the roots of the trees beneath them, frozen and dormant, waiting for a spring that is still months away. The patience of the trees becomes his own patience. The stillness of the earth becomes his own stillness. The silence is punctuated only by the breathing. It has become a complex, layered sound. There is the deep, chesty sigh of a man in the heaviest part of sleep, the soft, whistling breath of someone whose nose is partially blocked by the dry air, the rhythmic hush of air passing over woolen fibers. These sounds are not noises. They are the texture of the quiet. Lucius finds himself categorizing them, sorting the breaths into a mental ledger. He assigns a breath to each man, Marcus, Decimus, Quintus, Gaius, until the entire contubernium is accounted for. Everyone is here. Everyone is warm. The one blanket covers them all. As the minutes of the fourth watch stretch into what feels like an eternity of comfort, the boundary between the physical world and the world of the mind continues to dissolve. Lucius finds himself thinking about the color of the wool in the dark. In the light, the saga are a dull, earthy red or a charcoal gray. But in the dark, they are a color that doesn't exist, a deep, velvety shade of warmth. He imagines the sheep they came from, grazing on the high slopes of the Apennines, their fleeces growing thick and oily as the autumn air turned crisp. He thinks of the shepherds, the shearers, the spinners, and the weavers, a long chain of human labor that has culminated in this single, heavy blanket protecting 8 men in a forest at the edge of the world. The sheer number of people involved in his current comfort is a staggering, boring thought that lulls him further towards sleep. The straw beneath him shifts with a sound like dry parchment. Each stalk of straw is a hollow vessel of history, the sun of last summer, the rain of autumn, the labor of the harvest. Now its final purpose is to be a barrier to trap the air and hold the heat. Lucius feels the crunch of a single stalk beneath his hip. It is a tiny, brittle sound, a microscopic event in the vast silence of the night. He focuses on that sound, replaying it in his mind until it becomes a rhythmic pulse. Crunch. Pause. Crunch. It is the sound of the world settling into its final rest. The one blanket rule is a law of conservation. To move is to lose heat. To speak is to lose heat. To think too much is to wake the body and lose the precious, stagnant warmth of the huddle. And so Lucius practices the art of being nothing. He lets his identity fall away piece by piece. He is no longer a soldier of Rome. He is just a source of warmth. He is a pulse in the dark. He is a breath in the wool. The immense characters of the night, the snow, the leather, the wood, the straw, are his only companions. They are all engaged in the same task, the slow, monotonous, and beautiful process of waiting for the sun. The darkness remains absolute, a thick, comforting curtain that hides the reality of the freezing wilderness. Inside the tent, the world is small enough to be understood through touch and scent. The logistics of survival have been solved. The inventory has been taken. The breathing is synchronized. There is nothing left to do but to exist in this state of perfect, boring, and hypnotic safety. The fourth watch is a bridge of shadow, and Lucius is content to linger on it for as long as the night allows. The transition from the final watch of the night toward the very first, invisible inkling of the morning is a period of profound atmospheric density. Inside the leather tent, the world has contracted into a singular, warm, and airless point. The one blanket rule has now been in effect for over 8 hours, and the collective thermal mass of the 8 men has fundamentally altered the environment of the small enclosure. The air is no longer just air. It is a heavy, humid soup of shared life, a stagnant reservoir of heat that clings to the skin like a physical garment. For Lucius, lying in the motionless center of the huddle, the passage of time is no longer measured by the movement of the stars, which are hidden behind the thick, snow-laden leather, but by the slow, rhythmic settling of the men's bodies into the straw and the steady, hypnotic cycle of their breath. He finds himself focusing on the structural integrity of the tent's leather walls. In the absolute dark, his mind traces the grain of the goat hide. This leather was not merely skin. It was a highly engineered material, tanned using the bark of ancient oaks and treated with a mixture of tallow and fish oil to ensure its suppleness in the face of the northern frost. He imagines the microscopic structure of the collagen fibers within the leather, tightened by the cold on the outside, but kept flexible by the warmth of the contubernium on the inside. The tension between these two states creates a low-frequency hum, a vibration that Lucius can feel against his scalp as he rests his head on his folded tunic. It is a sound of immense pressure held in check, a boring structural victory that allows for the luxury of sleep. The leather is a living barrier, stretching minutely as the snow piles higher against its exterior, creating a soft, inward curve that makes the tent feel even more intimate, even more like a cocoon. The weight of the communal blanket, the vast, interconnected field of woolen saga, has reached a state of perfect stasis. The wool is heavy with the moisture of their breath, but this added weight only serves to increase its efficiency. Lucius contemplates the physics of the wool. Each hair of the sheep's fleece is a hollow, keratinous tube, and in the weaving of the cloaks, these tubes were crushed and tangled together to create millions of microscopic air pockets. Now, each of those millions of pockets is filled with a tiny volume of air heated to exactly 37 degrees. The logistics of the one blanket are a masterpiece of thermal conservation. By overlapping the cloaks, the men have eliminated the seams of cold that would exist if they slept individually. There is no edge to the warmth. It is a continuous, circulating field that flows from the neck of the first man to the feet of the eighth. Lucius feels the warmth of the man to his left, Decimus, as a steady, radiating pulse against his ribs. It is a slow, rhythmic heat, a biological furnace that requires no fuel other than the quiet persistence of the heart. The smell of the tent has become a complex, layered narrative of their survival. There is the dominant scent of the damp wool, a heavy, earthy aroma that smells of the hillsides of Italia and the wet fleece of 1,000 sheep. Beneath that is the sharper, more mineral scent of the leather, seasoned with the smoky tang of the tallow, and deeper still is the scent of the straw. The straw is no longer just dry bedding. It has been warmed and slightly humidified, releasing a sweet, cereal fragrance that reminds Lucius of the harvest festivals of his youth. This scent is a psychological anchor, a boring and repetitive reminder of the cycle of the seasons. Even here, in the frozen heart of Germania, the smell of the straw promises that the sun will eventually return, that the grain will grow again, and that this winter is merely a pause in the long story of the earth. He inhales the scent deeply, letting it fill his lungs and slow his pulse. In the corner of the tent, the heavy wooden poles, the papilio frame, creak with a slow, deliberate cadence. The wood, likely mountain pine, is dense and resinous. Lucius imagines the sap frozen within the grain of the wood, the amber-like fluid holding the structure together through sheer molecular stubbornness. He counts the creaks, assigning a number to each one. 1, 2, 3. The sound is like the ticking of a grandfather clock, but much slower, much more organic. It is the sound of the tent adjusting to the weight of the world. The snow outside is now likely 3 or 4 feet deep, a massive, white weight that has buried the camp in a tomb of silence. This weight is a blessing. It acts as a secondary wall, a crystalline barrier that prevents the biting wind from reaching the leather. The one blanket rule is supported by this external fortress of snow, a paradox where the very element that seeks to freeze them becomes the tool that keeps them warm. Lucius focuses on the sensation of his own hands, tucked deep into the folds of his tunic. His fingers are warm, the joints loose and comfortable. He compares this to the memory of the afternoon's labor, when his hands were stiff and blue from hauling frozen timber to the ramparts. The transition from that cold, punishing reality to this state of absolute, woolen comfort is a source of profound satisfaction. The logistics of the Legion are not just about marching and fighting. They are about the management of the body's resources. To be a soldier is to understand the value of a single, warm blanket. To be a soldier is to find peace in the monotony of a shared huddle. He moves a single finger, feeling the rough texture of the linen tunic, and then returns to total stillness. Any movement is a potential leak of heat, a violation of the one blanket pact. The silence of the night is now absolute. It is a thick, velvety quiet that seems to have mass. Lucius can hear the blood rushing in his own ears, a low, rhythmic whoosh that matches the breathing of the men around him. He begins to visualize the breathing as a visible thing, a soft, golden mist that rises from their chests, hits the leather ceiling, and then slowly descends to be inhaled again. This cycle of air is the only economy that matters now. There is no gold here, no promotion, no glory. There is only the exchange of oxygen and the preservation of heat. The boredom of this realization is hypnotic. He finds himself falling into a loop of thought, a repetitive mental circuit that revolves around the word warmth. Warmth of the wool, warmth of the breath, warmth of the brother, warmth of the earth. Outside, a single, heavy branch of a nearby fir tree finally gives way under the weight of the snow. The sound of its snapping is a distant, muffled crack, followed by a soft, long shhh as the snow it held cascades to the ground. Inside the tent, the sound is barely perceptible, a tiny tremor in the air that only Lucius, in his state of hyper-awareness, notices. It is a reminder of the fragility of the world outside, of the constant struggle for balance. But here, inside the leather and the wool, the balance has been achieved. The 8 men are a closed system, a stable entity that the winter cannot break. The snap of the branch is the only event of the last hour, a solitary marker in a desert of stillness. The logistics of the one blanket rule also extend to the arrangement of the men's heads. They lie with their heads slightly elevated on their folded tunics and cloaks, creating a row of faces in the dark. Lucius can sense the proximity of Marcus's face, the warmth of his breath, the faint scent of the grain pottage he ate. This closeness is not crowded, it is communal. In the dark, the individual faces are irrelevant. They are simply the sources of the breath that keeps the air warm. Lucius imagines their 8 breaths merging into a single, large lung that fills the tent, a collective respiration that sustains them all. This thought is immensely soothing, a boring and repetitive image that lulls his mind toward a deeper state of rest. As the pre-dawn hour stretches on, the condensation on the leather ceiling begins to freeze again, the moisture turning into a fine, crystalline powder. If a man were to brush against the ceiling, a shower of artificial snow would fall upon the blanket. But no one moves. The discipline of the contubernium is absolute. They are masters of the art of lying still. They have learned to find a universe of interest in the smallest sensations. The way the straw pricks a hip, the way the wool tickles a neck, the way a heart beats against a neighboring shoulder. These are the low-stakes dramas of the winter night, and they are more than enough to occupy the mind. Lucius finds himself thinking about the construction of his own sagum. He remembers the day it was issued to him at the depot in Mediolanum. It was new then, the wool stiff and smelling strongly of the dye vats. Over the years it has become soft, seasoned by his own sweat and the smoke of 100 campfires. It has become a second skin. Now, buttoned together with the cloaks of his brothers, it has become something even greater, a part of a collective shield. He traces the memory of the heavy bronze buttons, the fibulae, that hold the cloaks together. He imagines the metal, cold and hard, acting as the rivets in their woolen armor. The logistics of the buttons, the loops, and the overlapping edges are the silent guardians of their heat. The darkness is beginning to lose its absolute ink-like quality, turning instead to a deep, bruised purple. It is a subtle change, one that would be invisible to anyone not staring into the gloom for hours. It signals that the sun is beginning its long, cold approach to the horizon. But there is still much time left for sleep. The first light will not reach the floor of the forest for another hour, and it will be longer still before it penetrates the snow-covered leather of the tent. Until then, the one blanket rule remains the law of the land. Lucius closes his eyes and focuses on the heat. It is a thick, drowsy, and unhurried warmth. It feels like being submerged in a vat of warm oil, or like being buried in the sand of a Mediterranean beach. The cold of the Germanic winter is a myth, a story told to children to make them stay by the fire. Here in the tent, there is only the reality of the wool and the breath. He lets his mind drift away from the leather, away from the snow, and into the deep gray spaces of the subconscious. He is warm. He is safe. He is bored. And in this boredom, he finds the most profound rest he has ever known. The story of the night is almost complete, but for now, the stillness continues, a slow and rhythmic celebration of the simple act of staying alive together. The pre-dawn hour has solidified into a state of suspended animation. Within the leather-bound sanctuary of the contubernium, the one blanket rule has reached its most efficient phase. The heat, which began as a fragile spark between individual bodies hours ago, has now become a monolithic entity, a thick, invisible fog of warmth that occupies every cubic inch of the tent's interior. For Lucius, the passage of time has lost its linear quality. He exists in a world of pure sensation, where the most significant events are the infinitesimal movements of a woolen thread, or the slow, rhythmic expansion of a comrade's ribcage against his own. The darkness inside the tent is no longer a void. It has become a textured, heavy curtain that shields the 8 men from the brutal, crystalline reality of the Germanic morning that is beginning to gather its strength outside. Lucius finds himself focusing on the specific, tactile details of the fibulae, the heavy bronze pins and buttons that link the 8 individual saga into a single, seamless canopy of protection. In his mind's eye, he traces the cool, smooth surface of the bronze. He remembers the weight of these fasteners in his hand, solid, dependable pieces of military hardware, cast in the foundries of the South. Each button is a small, functional work of art, etched with simple geometric patterns that have now been smoothed by years of friction against the coarse wool. He imagines the way the metal has slowly absorbed the heat of the tent, losing its initial, biting chill and becoming a warm, metallic anchor within the fabric. The logistics of the buttons are a study in patience. 8 men, 16 cloaks, and dozens of points of connection, all meticulously fastened in the dim light of evening to ensure that not a single draft of the freezing northern air can find its way into their shared pocket of life. The blanket itself, the combined mass of the woolen cloaks, has settled with a heavy, satisfying finality. Lucius contemplates the microscopic landscape of the wool. He visualizes the individual fibers, each one a rugged, scaled cylinder of protein, interlocking with its neighbors to create a barrier that is almost as dense as the leather of the tent. The wool is damp now, saturated with the humidity of their collective breath, but this moisture has only increased the boring comfort of the weight. It presses down on his limbs with a gravitational force that seems to pin his very soul to the earth. He feels the way the wool catches on the weave of his linen tunic, a subtle, prickly friction that reminds him of his physical boundaries. This weight is the ultimate luxury of the winter soldier. It is the physical manifestation of safety, a heavy, warm embrace that signals to the body that the time for vigilance has not yet returned. Beneath the blanket, the straw has undergone a slow, structural transformation. Over the course of the night, the thousands of hollow stalks have been crushed and molded by the weight of the 8 men into a series of deep, insulating troughs. Lucius can feel the way the straw has conformed to the curve of his hip and the length of his spine. It is a custom-engineered bed of gold, a dry and brittle foundation that separates the warmth of his blood from the ancient, frozen heart of the Germanic soil. He focuses on the scent of the straw, a dry, sun-baked aroma that has been revived by the heat of the tent. It is a smell of the harvest, of late summer afternoons in the fields of the Po Valley, a scent that seems entirely out of place in this world of ice and iron. This olfactory dissonance is hypnotic, a sensory loop that pulls his mind away from the cold and back into a state of drowsy, golden nostalgia. The condensation on the ceiling of the tent has now reached a state of frozen perfection, because the temperature near the very peak of the tent, near the small air vent, is slightly lower than the air near the men. The moisture of their breath has crystallized into a delicate, white fur of frost. Lucius imagines these crystals as microscopic forests, growing in the dark, their branches interlocking to create a secondary layer of insulation. Every so often, the weight of the snow on the outside of the tent causes the leather to shift minutely, and a few of these frost crystals detach, falling through the air with a sound so quiet it is more of a vibration than a noise. They land on the woolen blanket with a soft, microscopic tink, disappearing instantly into the warm fibers. This cycle of freezing and falling is the only rhythm that matters now, a slow, hydraulic clock marking the final hours of the night. The silence outside has deepened into something almost subterranean. The snow has likely covered the tent entirely now, creating a dome of white that swallows all sound. The howling of the winter wind, the cracking of frozen trees, and the distant calls of the night watch are all filtered through several feet of packed snow and the thick, oiled leather of the tent. What remains is a silence so profound that the internal sounds of the contubernium take on a monumental scale. Lucius can hear the rhythmic, liquid sound of someone swallowing, the slow, dry rustle of a man shifting his shoulder, the steady, unhurried thud of 8 hearts beating against the straw. These sounds are the heartbeat of the Legion, the low-frequency pulse of a machine that refuses to stop. He finds himself timing his own breathing to these sounds, creating a complex, polyphonic rhythm of respiration that fills the tent with a sense of living harmony. The one blanket rule also dictates the management of the shared scent. The air is thick with the smell of the men, a heavy, honest musk of sweat, damp wool, and the lingering scent of the evening meal. To an outsider, it might be overwhelming, but to Lucius, it is the smell of home. It is a familiar, boring, and utterly reliable scent that confirms he is exactly where he is supposed to be. He can smell the faint, resinous tang of the pine wood used for the tent poles, a sharp, clean note that cuts through the heavier aromas of the wool and leather. He can also smell the iron of their stacked equipment, the dull, metallic scent of the Larica segmentata and the scuta, a reminder of the hard, cold world that awaits them at dawn. But for now, that world is irrelevant. The only reality is the scent of the straw, the wool, and the breath. Lucius finds his mind wandering into the logistics of the Roman supply chain, a suitably boring topic for the pre-dawn hours. He thinks about the grain sacks sitting in the dark, filled with the measured rations of spelt. He imagines the process of the harvest, the grinding of the grain between heavy stones, the transport of the flour across the mountains in creaking ox carts. He follows the path of a single grain of spelt from a sun-drenched field in Italia to this frozen tent in Germania. The sheer, monotonous scale of the empire's logistics is a comforting thought. He is part of a system so vast and so methodical that even here, in the middle of a blizzard, his porridge for the morning is already accounted for. This sense of being a small, well-cared-for cog in a massive machine allows him to let go of any remaining traces of anxiety. He is not responsible for his survival. The empire is. He only needs to stay warm. He only needs to stay still. In the absolute gloom, the texture of the air itself seems to have changed. It feels viscous, a heavy fluid that moves in slow, lazy currents around their bodies. Lucius feels a slight, cool draft near his temple, a needle-thin stream of air descending from the peak of the tent. It is a sharp contrast to the deep, humid heat beneath the blanket, a reminder of the infinite cold that lies just beyond the leather. He focuses on the point where the cool air meets his skin, feeling the precise boundary between the internal warmth and the external chill. He begins to visualize the heat of his body as a visible glow, a soft, amber light that pushes back against the darkness and the cold. He imagines the 8 glows of the men merging into a single, bright sun that occupies the center of the tent, a collective source of energy that the winter cannot extinguish. The one blanket rule is a testament to the power of the mundane. There is no glory in huddling together for warmth. There is no poetry in the smell of damp wool or the sound of shifting straw. And yet, in this moment, it is the most important thing in the world. The survival of the Legion depends on these boring, repetitive acts of cooperation. Lucius feels a deep, quiet pride in his ability to lie still, to share his heat, and to be a reliable part of the huddle. He thinks of the men in the other tents, all doing the exact same thing. Thousands of soldiers across the frontier locked in the same silent struggle against the cold. The thought of this vast, synchronized stillness is deeply hypnotic. It is a form of collective meditation, a continent-wide exercise in patience and endurance. As the pre-dawn hours stretch toward their conclusion, the darkness begins to take on a subtle, grainy quality. It is not yet light, but the absolute velvet blackness of midnight has softened into a deep, bruised indigo. Lucius stares into this darkness, his eyes wide but unseeing. He finds himself counting the ridges in the leather ceiling, tracing the invisible lines of the stitching with his mind. Each stitch is a marker of time, a small, repetitive event that has already happened. He follows the seams to the central ridge pole, then down to the pegs and back again. It is a mental circuit that he has completed 100 times during the night, a boring and reliable path through the geography of the tent. The weight of the blanket seems to increase with every passing minute. It is as if the wool is absorbing the very essence of the night, becoming heavier and more substantial as the morning approaches. Lucius feels his breathing slow to a crawl, each inhalation a deep, deliberate journey into the lungs, each exhalation a slow release of heat into the shared air. He is no longer a separate entity. He is a part of the tent, a part of the straw, a part of the one blanket. The boundaries of his body have dissolved into the collective warmth of the contubernium. He is a pulse in the dark, a steady, unhurried beat in the heart of the winter. Outside, the first faint hint of a bird's call might be heard, a single, lonely note from a snowbound thrush. But inside the tent there is only the silence of the one blanket. The men do not stir. They have become masters of the long wait. They know that the sun is coming, but they also know that the heat they have built must be protected until the very last moment. The logistics of the morning, the lighting of the fire, the scraping of the ice, the donning of the armor, are still a lifetime away. For now there is only the warmth. There is only the wool. There is only the boring, beautiful, and hypnotic peace of the shared huddle. Lucius closes his eyes and lets the darkness take him. He focuses on the sensation of Marcus's shoulder against his own, a solid and unwavering presence. He feels the rhythm of the straw, the scent of the leather, and the heavy, humid weight of the communal cloaks. He is warm. He is safe. He is part of the one blanket rule. And as long as that rule holds, the Germanic winter is nothing but a distant, silent dream. The story of the night continues to unfold in the smallest of details. A slow and methodical celebration of the simple act of staying alive together in the dark. The transition into the first gray pre-dawn hours is a period of absolute sensory stagnation. Within the leather-bound sanctuary of the contubernium, the one blanket rule has reached its most efficient and heavy phase. The heat, which began as a fragile spark between individual bodies hours ago, has now become a monolithic entity, a thick, invisible fog of warmth that occupies every cubic inch of the tent's interior. For Lucius, the passage of time has lost its linear quality. He exists in a world of pure sensation, where the most significant events are the infinitesimal movements of a woolen thread, or the slow, rhythmic expansion of a comrade's ribcage against his own. The darkness inside the tent is no longer a void. It has become a textured, heavy curtain that shields the 8 men from the brutal, crystalline reality of the Germanic morning that is beginning to gather its strength outside the thick goatskin walls. The air in the tent has changed its character as the morning approaches. It has become thick, a term the soldiers use to describe air that has been breathed and rebreathed until it carries the weight of a physical substance. It is a humid, nurturing medium, laden with the sense of their survival. Lucius focuses on the smell of the damp wool, a deep, earthy aroma that carries the memory of rain-washed hillsides and the oily lanolin of the sheep. This scent is the primary marker of their safety. Beneath the wool, there is the sharper, more mineral scent of the leather, seasoned with the smoky tang of tallow and the faint, resinous aroma of the pinewood ridge pole. And deeper still is the scent of the straw bedding. The straw is no longer just dry stalks. It has been warmed and slightly humidified by their bodies, releasing a sweet, cereal fragrance that reminds Lucius of the harvest festivals of his youth. This olfactory tapestry is hypnotic, a sensory loop that pulls his mind away from the cold and back into a state of drowsy, golden nostalgia. He finds himself focusing on the structural integrity of the tent's leather walls. In the absolute dark, his mind traces the grain of the goat hide. This leather was not merely skin. It was a highly engineered material, tanned using the bark of ancient oaks and treated with a mixture of tallow and fish oil to ensure its suppleness in the face of the northern frost. He imagines the microscopic structure of the collagen fibers within the leather, tightened by the cold on the outside, but kept flexible by the warmth of the contubernium on the inside. The tension between these two states creates a low-frequency hum, a vibration that Lucius can feel against his scalp as he rests his head on his folded tunic. It is a sound of immense pressure held in check, a boring structural victory that allows for the luxury of sleep. The leather is a living barrier, stretching minutely as the snow piles higher against its exterior, creating a soft, inward curve that makes the tent feel even more intimate, even more like a cocoon. The weight of the communal blanket, the vast, interconnected field of woolen saga, has reached a state of perfect stasis. The wool is heavy with the moisture of their breath, but this added weight only serves to increase its efficiency. Lucius contemplates the physics of the wool. Each hair of the sheep's fleece is a hollow, keratinous tube, and in the weaving of the cloaks, these tubes were crushed and tangled together to create millions of microscopic air pockets. Now, each of those millions of pockets is filled with a tiny volume of air heated to exactly 37 degrees. The logistics of the one blanket are a masterpiece of thermal conservation. By overlapping the cloaks, the men have eliminated the seams of cold that would exist if they slept individually. There is no edge to the warmth. It is a continuous, circulating field that flows from the neck of the first man to the feet of the eighth. Lucius feels the warmth of the man to his left, Decimus, as a steady, radiating pulse against his ribs. It is a slow, rhythmic heat, a biological furnace that requires no fuel other than the quiet persistence of the heart. In the corner of the tent, the heavy wooden poles, the papilio frame, creak with a slow, deliberate cadence. The wood, likely mountain pine, is dense and resinous. Lucius imagines the sap frozen within the grain of the wood, the amber-like fluid holding the structure together through sheer molecular stubbornness. He counts the creaks, assigning a number to each one. 1, 2, 3. The sound is like the ticking of a grandfather clock, but much slower, much more organic. It is the sound of the tent adjusting to the weight of the world. The snow outside is now likely 3 or 4 feet deep, a massive white weight that has buried the camp in a tomb of silence. This weight is a blessing. It acts as a secondary wall, a crystalline barrier that prevents the biting wind from reaching the leather. The one blanket rule is supported by this external fortress of snow, a paradox where the very element that seeks to freeze them becomes the tool that keeps them warm. Lucius focuses on the sensation of his own hands, tucked deep into the folds of his tunic. His fingers are warm, the joints loose and comfortable. He compares this to the memory of the afternoon's labor, when his hands were stiff and blue from hauling frozen timber to the ramparts. The transition from that cold, punishing reality to this state of absolute, woolen comfort is a source of profound satisfaction. The logistics of the Legion are not just about marching and fighting. They are about the management of the body's resources. To be a soldier is to understand the value of a single, warm blanket. To be a soldier is to find peace in the monotony of a shared huddle. He moves a single finger, feeling the rough texture of the linen tunic, and then returns to total stillness. Any movement is a potential leak of heat, a violation of the one blanket pact. The silence of the night is now absolute. It is a thick, velvety quiet that seems to have mass. Lucius can hear the blood rushing in his own ears, a low, rhythmic whoosh that matches the breathing of the men around him. He begins to visualize the breathing as a visible thing, a soft, golden mist that rises from their chests, hits the leather ceiling, and then slowly descends to be inhaled again. This cycle of air is the only economy that matters now. There is no gold here, no promotion, no glory. There is only the exchange of oxygen and the preservation of heat. The boredom of this realization is hypnotic. He finds himself falling into a loop of thought, a repetitive mental circuit that revolves around the word warmth. Warmth of the wool, warmth of the breath, warmth of the brother, warmth of the earth. He allows his mind to dwell on the specific grain of the wooden shields, the scuda, leaning in the corner. Even though he cannot see them, he knows every scratch and dent on the surface of his own shield. He thinks about the layers of plywood, birch, and poplar glued together with animal hide glue. He thinks about the linen and calfskin that cover the wood, providing a smooth surface for the painted insignia of the 9th Legion. In the heat of the tent, the wood expands minutely, and the leather cover tightens. He imagines he can hear the infinitesimal creak of the glue, a sound so small it exists only in his memory. This level of detail, this focus on the microscopic and the mundane, is what keeps the mind grounded during the long winter night. It is a way of mapping the small universe of the tent, ensuring that every object and every texture is accounted for. The straw beneath him shifts with a sound like dry parchment. Each stalk of straw is a hollow vessel of history, the sun of last summer, the rain of autumn, the labor of the harvest. Now its final purpose is to be a barrier to trap the air and hold the heat. Lucius feels the crunch of a single stalk beneath his hip. It is a tiny, brittle sound, a microscopic event in the vast silence of the night. He focuses on that sound, replaying it in his mind until it becomes a rhythmic pulse. Crunch. Pause. Crunch. It is the sound of the world settling into its final rest. He finds himself wondering how many stalks of straw it takes to insulate a man from the frozen earth. Thousands, millions. The calculation is a boring, endless task that lulls him further towards sleep. The one blanket rule also demands a certain psychological discipline. To lie so close to others for so long requires a quiet mind. There is no room for anxiety, no room for the restlessness of the day. The men have learned to let their thoughts drift like the snow outside, slowly, aimlessly, and without purpose. They think of the taste of warm bread, the feel of the sun on their skin, the sound of a distant stream. These are low-stakes thoughts, simple memories that provide a gentle, flickering light in the darkness of the mind. They are the mental equivalent of the small oil lamp, providing just enough warmth to keep the shadows at bay. Lucius thinks of a specific stream near his home in the Umbrian hills. The way the water felt cool against his ankles in July, the way the pebbles were smoothed by the current. The contrast between that memory and the frozen reality of Germania is not painful. It is merely a different point on the long, slow cycle of the world. As the pre-dawn hours stretch toward their conclusion, the darkness begins to take on a subtle, grainy quality. It is not yet light, but the absolute velvet blackness of midnight has softened into a deep, bruised indigo. Lucius stares into this darkness, his eyes wide but unseeing. He finds himself counting the ridges in the leather ceiling, tracing the invisible lines of the stitching with his mind. Each stitch is a marker of time, a small, repetitive event that has already happened. He follows the seams to the central ridge pole, then down to the pegs and back again. It is a mental circuit that he has completed 100 times during the night, a boring and reliable path through the geography of the tent. He turns his attention to the collective weight of the men. 8 bodies, each roughly 150 to 170 pounds pressed together. That is over 1,200 pounds of human warmth and muscle, anchored by gravity and the heavy wool. This mass creates its own microgravity, pulling the heat inward and holding it fast. He feels the slight tremor in Marcus's shoulder as the man dreams, a tiny, flickering movement that is quickly absorbed by the surrounding warmth. The one blanket is a shock absorber, a buffer against the world's edges. In this state, the idea of a solitary life seems like a dangerous myth. Survival is a group effort, a shared logistics of the body. The silence is punctuated only by the breathing. It has become a complex, layered sound. There is the deep, chesty sigh of a man in the heaviest part of sleep, the soft, whistling breath of someone whose nose is partially blocked by the dry air, the rhythmic hush of air passing over woolen fibers. These sounds are not noises. They are the texture of the quiet. Lucius finds himself categorizing them, sorting the breaths into a mental ledger. He assigns a breath to each man, Marcus, Decimus, Quintus, Gaius, until the entire contubernium is accounted for. Everyone is here. Everyone is warm. The one blanket covers them all. He imagines the breath leaving their mouths as a faint, silver mist, rising to meet the frost on the ceiling, a beautiful and boring cycle of transformation. Outside, the first faint hint of a bird's call might be heard, a single, lonely note from a snowbound thrush testing the air. But inside the tent there is only the silence of the one blanket. The men do not stir. They have become masters of the long wait. They know that the sun is coming, but they also know that the heat they have built must be protected until the very last moment. The logistics of the morning, the lighting of the fire, the scraping of the ice, the donning of the armor, are still a lifetime away. For now, there is only the warmth. There is only the wool. There is only the boring, beautiful, and hypnotic peace of the shared huddle. Lucius closes his eyes and lets the darkness take him. He focuses on the sensation of Marcus's shoulder against his own, a solid and unwavering presence. He feels the rhythm of the straw, the scent of the leather, and the heavy, humid weight of the communal cloaks. He is warm. He is safe. He is part of the one blanket rule. And as long as that rule holds, the Germanic winter is nothing but a distant, silent dream. He follows the sensation of his own heartbeat, a slow, steady thud that echoes the rhythm of the legion itself. The story of the night continues to unfold in the smallest of details, a slow and methodical celebration of the simple act of staying alive together in the dark. The weight of the saga cloak seems to increase with every passing minute. It is as if the wool is absorbing the very essence of the night, becoming heavier and more substantial as the morning approaches. Lucius feels his breathing slow to a crawl, each inhalation a deep, deliberate journey into the lungs, each exhalation a slow release of heat into the shared air. He is no longer a separate entity. He is a part of the tent, a part of the straw, a part of the one blanket. The boundaries of his body have dissolved into the collective warmth of the contubernium. He is a pulse in the dark, a steady, unhurried beat in the heart of the winter. He listens to the infinitesimal sound of a drop of condensation freezing on the leather above him, a tiny, crystalline click that signals the coldest moment of the day has arrived. But inside, under the wool, the warmth remains absolute. The hour of the bruised charcoal sky has arrived, that liminal space where the night has exhausted its darkness, but the sun has yet to offer its first sliver of gold. Outside the leather tent, the Germanic wilderness is locked in a frozen stasis, so profound that the very molecules of the air seem to have slowed to a crawl. The snow, now piled nearly to the peak of the tent's sloped roof, has transformed the shelter into a subterranean grotto of warmth. Inside, the one blanket rule is performing its final, most critical labor of the night. The air within the small enclosure has reached a state of total, viscous saturation. It is a thick, humid microclimate, a stagnant pool of life-sustaining heat that has been carefully cultivated over the last 9 hours. For Lucius, lying at the heart of the contubernium, the world has narrowed down to the microscopic architecture of the wool, the rhythmic sigh of the straw, and the steady, unhurried pulse of 7 other men. He finds himself contemplating the internal surface of the leather walls. In the faint, almost imperceptible gray light that has begun to seep through the small air vent at the peak, the leather reveals its intricate organic geography. He traces the patterns of the grain, the tiny ridges and furrows where the goat's skin once moved over muscle and bone. These hides were tanned with the bark of northern oaks, a process that took months of soaking in deep, tannin-rich vats. He imagines the smell of the tan yard, the bitter, woody scent of the bark and the sharp, acidic tang of the curing liquors. Now, years later, that scent has been replaced by the comforting musk of the tent, wood smoke, damp wool, and the faint, sweet aroma of the straw. The leather is cool to the eye but warm to the imagination, a flexible stone wall that has held the winter at bay through sheer, stubborn density. The communal blanket, the vast, overlapping field of the Eight Saga, has become a landscape of its own. Lucius focuses on a single square inch of the wool near his chin. He visualizes the microscopic structure of the fibers. Each hair is a complex arrangement of keratinous scales, overlapping like the shingles on a villa's roof. These scales catch the warm air rising from his skin, trapping it in the interstitial spaces between the threads. The logistics of the one blanket are a masterpiece of thermal engineering. By fastening the cloaks together with heavy bronze fibulae, the men have created a closed circuit of energy. There are no gaps, no leaks, no places where the precious heat can escape into the dark. The weight of the damp wool, now heavy with the moisture of their shared breath, presses down on his chest with a slow, gravitational authority. It is a weight that discourages movement, a weight that demands a total, meditative stillness. Beneath the blanket, the weaver's tuck remains perfectly intact. Lucius can feel the warmth of Marcus's calf against his own, the heat passing through the layers of their linen tunics with a steady, radiating persistence. This physical connection is the foundation of their survival. He thinks of the heat as a liquid, flowing slowly from the center of the huddle to the extremities, then back again, guided by the insulation of the wool and the straw. The straw itself has been pulverized by the weight of the night, turned from stiff, hollow stalks into a soft, golden powder that cushions their joints. He can hear the straw breathing, a soft, dry rustle that occurs every time a man shifts his weight by a fraction of a millimeter. It is the sound of the earth settling, a sound that is both boring and deeply, fundamentally reassuring. In the corner of the tent, the stacked equipment has begun to emerge from the shadows. The curved scuda, the great rectangular shields, stand like silent sentinels. Lucius imagines the grain of the poplar wood beneath the leather facing, the way the layers of wood are glued together with a mixture of lime and bullhide glue. He thinks about the iron boss at the center of the shield, the umbo, which is currently cold to the touch but will soon be gripped by a warm hand. The shields are not just weapons, they are part of the tent's furniture, acting as additional windbreaks near the entrance. The logistics of the Legion are reflected in the way every object has a dual purpose. The cloak is a blanket, the shield is a wall, and the comrade is a heater. This functional simplicity is the secret to their endurance. Lucius focuses on the sound of the silence. It is not an empty silence, but one filled with the low-frequency vibrations of the camp. He can hear the distant, muffled thud of a mule stamping its foot in the baggage lines, a sound that travels through the frozen ground and vibrates the soles of his feet. He can hear the rhythmic, crystalline click of the frost forming on the exterior leather, a microscopic percussion that marks the descent of the temperature outside. And closest of all, he hears the breathing. It has become a single, unified sound, a slow, deep, and oceanic rise and fall that fills the tent. He synchronizes his own heart rate to this rhythm, letting his pulse slow until it matches the steady beat of the contubernium. Thump, pause, thump. It is the sound of the machine at rest, the sound of the empire waiting for the sun. He finds his mind wandering into the history of the wool. He imagines the sheep being shorn in the high pastures of the Apennines, the fleece falling away in a single, greasy cloud. He thinks of the women in the villages, their fingers stained with lanolin as they spin the wool into thick, sturdy yarn. He thinks of the heavy wooden looms, the rhythmic thud-clack of the shuttle as it weaves the sagum that now protects him. This long chain of human effort, stretching across hundreds of miles and many months, has culminated in this moment of warmth. The boredom of the night is a tribute to all that work. It is a moment of hard-won peace, a pause in the endless labor of the Legion. He feels a deep, quiet gratitude for the simple existence of the wool, for its weight and its smell and its unyielding ability to hold the heat. The moisture in the air has begun to settle on the bronze fittings of their armor, creating a fine, dull sheen. Lucius visualizes the microscopic droplets of water clinging to the metal, the surface tension holding them in place. He thinks about the oil they applied to the iron strips of the Larica segmentata, a heavy, pungent oil that smells of fish and earth. This oil is the only thing standing between the armor and the hungry rust of the Germanic winter. The logistics of maintenance are as important as the logistics of heat. Every object in the tent is a testament to a specific, boring task performed with disciplined regularity. The oiling of the iron, the sharpening of the stakes, the stitching of the leather, all of these small, monotonous acts have come together to create this pocket of safety. As the gray light outside grows a fraction stronger, the interior of the tent begins to reveal its colors. The dark charcoal of the wool turns to a deep, earthy brown. The black of the leather becomes a rich, dark amber. The gray of the straw becomes a pale, dusty gold. These colors are muted, filtered through the thick snow and the hide, but they are there. Lucius watches the light move across the surface of the central ridge pole. The wood is worn smooth, polished by the hands of countless soldiers who have carried it through the forests of Gaul and the mountains of the north. He follows a single grain of the wood with his eyes, tracing its path from the base to the peak. It is a slow, hypnotic journey that occupies his mind for many minutes. There is no hurry. The sun is still far below the horizon, and the one blanket rule is still the only law that matters. The sensation of the shared heat has reached a point of total equilibrium. There is no longer a sense of my warmth and your warmth. It is simply the warmth. It is a collective atmosphere, a shared biological wealth that belongs to all of them and none of them. Lucius feels the weight of Marcus's shoulder against his own, a solid, unwavering presence that provides as much psychological warmth as physical heat. He thinks of the other 7 men, each one a history, each one a collection of memories and hopes, but in this moment they are simply sources of breath and heartbeats. They are the components of the huddle, the parts of the whole. This dissolution of the self into the group is the ultimate comfort of the soldier. It is the feeling of being part of something larger, something stronger, something that can survive even the longest and coldest of nights. Outside, a single, heavy crust of snow slides off a nearby branch and hits the ground with a soft, muffled whump. The sound is so low it is felt more as a pressure change in the air than as a noise. Inside the tent, not a single man stirs. They are locked in the final, deepest layer of their rest. The boredom of the night has become a form of art, a masterpiece of stillness and conservation. Lucius feels his eyelids grow heavy again, the gray light of the pre-dawn acting as a soft, visual sedative. He focuses on the smell of the straw, the texture of the wool, and the rhythmic sigh of the breathing. He is warm. He is safe. He is part of the one blanket. The story of the night is drawing toward its conclusion, but for now, the stillness remains, a slow and methodical celebration of the simple act of staying alive together in the heart of the winter. The transition from night to day is not a sudden event, but a slow, tectonic shift in the atmosphere. The one blanket rule will remain in effect until the very moment the order is given to rise. Until then, every breath is a victory, every heartbeat is a defiance of the frost, and every minute of boredom is a precious gift of rest. Lucius lets himself drift back into the gray spaces of the mind, his consciousness floating on the surface of the warmth like a leaf on a still pond. The winter is still there, just inches away, but it is a powerless ghost. Inside the leather and the wool, there is only the peace of the contubernium. The final hour of the long Germanic night has arrived, and with it comes a silence so profound, it seems to vibrate within the very fibers of the leather tent. This is the hour of the transition, where the deep, bruised indigo of the pre-dawn sky begins to dissolve into a pale, translucent gray. Outside, the world is a monochromatic masterpiece of frost. The snow has ceased its descent, leaving behind a landscape that is perfectly level, perfectly white, and perfectly still. The camp of the 9th Legion is no longer a collection of tents and fortifications, but a series of soft, white mounds, as if the earth itself has grown a protective, crystalline skin. Inside the 3rd Contubernium, the one blanket rule has reached its final, most successful state of being. The 8 men are encased in a tomb of warmth, a small, circular universe where the only law is the preservation of life through the simple, repetitive act of staying together. Lucius opens his eyes, not because of a noise or a disturbance, but because the quality of the darkness has changed. It is no longer the absolute velvet black of the midnight watches. It is now a grainy, textured shadow that allows him to see the physical reality of his sanctuary. He looks up at the ceiling of the tent. The leather, once an undifferentiated void, now reveals its intricate history. He sees the heavy, double-stitched seams where the goat hides are joined, the waxed thread standing out in sharp relief against the dark, oil-soaked skin. He follows the path of a single seam as it travels toward the central ridge pole. Along this line, a row of tiny, frozen droplets of condensation hangs suspended. In the new light, they look like a string of gray pearls. He watches one droplet for several minutes, observing the way it trembles slightly with the collective vibration of the men's breathing. It does not fall. It is held in place by the same delicate balance of forces that has kept them safe all night. The tension between the freezing void outside and the humid warmth within. The weight of the communal blanket, the vast, heavy field of the joined saga is at its maximum. Over the course of the night, the wool has absorbed the moisture of their breath and the humidity of the air, becoming a dense, sodden shield. To Lucius, this weight is the ultimate comfort. It feels like the hand of the empire itself, pressing him down into the straw, telling him that his only duty is to remain still. He focuses on the texture of the wool against his neck. It is a coarse, honest fabric, smelling of lanolin, wood smoke, and the faint, sweet scent of dried herbs. He can feel the individual fibers, the wiry, resilient hairs of mountain sheep, interlocking to create a barrier that no draft can penetrate. He imagines the microscopic pockets of air trapped within the weave, millions of tiny chambers of heat that have been his only protection against the Germanic winter. The logistics of the wool are simple, boring, and perfect. It is a material designed for one thing: the slow, unhurried endurance of the cold. Beneath the blanket, the 8 men are a study in collective stillness. Their breathing has become so synchronized that it sounds like the rhythmic pulse of a single, large organism. Lucius listens to the sound, a slow, deep hush of air entering the lungs, followed by a long, warm sigh as it is released into the shared space. He times his own heartbeats to this rhythm. 1, 2, 3, 4. The pulse of the contubernium is the only clock that matters now. There is no hurry to face the day. The sun, though rising, is still a pale ghost behind the thick clouds and the deep snow. The logistics of the morning, the clearing of the drifts, the lighting of the cook fires, the donning of the cold, iron armor, are still distant concepts. For now, the only reality is the heat. It is a thick, stagnant warmth that has soaked into his very bones, softening the muscles and stilling the mind. Lucius finds his attention drawn to the straw beneath him. Over the last 10 hours, the dry stalks have been crushed by the weight of their bodies, transformed into a fine, insulating powder. He moves his hip a fraction of an inch, hearing the soft, dry crunch of the bedding. It is a sound of the earth, a reminder that they are cradled by the soil of Germania even as they dream of the sun of Italia. He focuses on the scent of the straw, a dry, cereal aroma that has been revived by the heat of the tent. It is a boring, repetitive scent, but in its boredom lies its power. It speaks of continuity, of the cycle of the seasons, and of the fundamental connection between the soldier and the land. He imagines the millions of stalks of grain that were harvested to create this single bed, a vast, golden effort of labor that has culminated in this moment of quiet survival. In the corner of the tent, the equipment has begun to take on a more distinct form. The scuda, the great rectangular shields, stand in a neat row, their curved surfaces catching the first gray hints of light. Lucius looks at the bronze boss of his own shield. It is covered in a fine layer of frost, a delicate white fur that has formed in the coldest part of the tent near the floor. He imagines the feel of the cold metal against his hand, a sharp contrast to the warmth of the blanket. He looks at the larica segmentata, the iron strips of his armor, piled neatly near the grain sacks. The iron is dark and still, wiped clean with oil to prevent the rust. The logistics of the Legion are reflected in this order. Everything has its place, and everything is prepared for the transition from the world of the blanket to the world of the sword. But that transition is not yet here. The order to rise has not been given. The silence of the camp remains absolute. The one blanket rule has created a state of psychological unity. In the dim light, Lucius can see the faces of his comrades, Marcus, Decimus, Quintus. They are not individuals now, they are the guardians of the heat. Their eyes are closed, their expressions neutral, their minds as still as the snow outside. He feels a deep, quiet sense of brotherhood, a connection that requires no words and no action. They have shared the most basic of human needs, warmth, and in that sharing they have become an unbreakable unit. The boredom of the night has been their greatest ally. It has allowed them to conserve their energy, to slow their pulses, and to wait out the winter with a patient, methodical discipline. He thinks of the word contubernium, those who share a tent, and realizes that it is the most important title he holds. The silence outside is occasionally punctuated by the smallest of sounds. He hears the rhythmic tink of a frost crystal detaching from the exterior of the leather and falling into the snow. He hears the low, groaning stretch of the wooden ridge pole as it adjusts to the weight of the morning. These sounds are not disturbances. They are the punctuation marks in a story of absolute stillness. They confirm that the world is still there, that the tent is still holding, and that the one blanket rule is still in effect. He focuses on the point where the leather meets the earth, where the snow has piled so high that it has created a perfect seal. They are in a vacuum of warmth, a small, humid pocket of life in a world of ice. As the gray light grows stronger, the interior of the tent begins to reveal its true colors. The dark charcoal of the wool turns to a deep, earthy brown. The black of the leather becomes a rich, dark amber. The gray of the straw becomes a pale, dusty gold. These colors are muted, filtered through the thick snow and the hide, but they are there. Lucius watches a single beam of light, a thin, needle-like shaft, descend from the air vent at the peak of the tent. It illuminates the microscopic dust motes dancing in the air, a slow, chaotic ballet of particles. He follows the movement of one mote, watching as it rises on a current of warm air, then slowly descends as it cools. It is a hypnotic, boring sight that occupies his mind for many minutes. It is a visual representation of the air they have been sharing all night, a constant, circular exchange of life. The sensation of the shared heat has reached its peak. It is no longer a physical feeling, but a state of being. Lucius feels as though he is melting into the straw, his body becoming a part of the tent's very structure. He is no longer a separate entity. He is a component of the huddle. He feels the warmth of Marcus's shoulder against his own, a solid, unwavering presence that provides a sense of absolute security. He thinks of the other 7 men, each one a source of breath and heartbeats, and realizes that together they are stronger than the winter. The logistics of survival have been solved. The night has been conquered. They have stayed warm, they have stayed still, and they have stayed bored. Outside, the first muffled notes of the camp's morning trumpet, the buchina, can be heard in the far distance. It is a soft, mournful sound, filtered through feet of snow and layers of leather. It is not a call to action yet, but a signal that the world of the living is beginning to stir. Inside the tent, the men do not move. They wait for the sound of their own centurion's voice, for the rhythmic thud of the morning watch. Until then, they remain under the one blanket. They cling to the final minutes of the night's peace, the final moments of the collective warmth they have built so carefully. Lucius closes his eyes one last time, inhaling the scent of the wool and the straw, feeling the weight of the cloaks on his chest. He is warm. He is safe. He is part of the 9th Legion, and the one blanket rule has seen him through to the dawn. The story of the night is now complete. It is a story of stillness, of shared breath, and of the simple, unhurried logistics of heat. It is a story where nothing happened, and in that nothing, everything was preserved. The winter is still there, and the Germanic forest remains a cold and indifferent wilderness, but inside the tent of the 3rd contubernium, the light has returned. The men have survived. They have shared their heat, They have shared their rest, and they have shared the boring, beautiful peace of the winter night. As the gray light finally illuminates the floor of the tent, the one blanket remains their world, their fortress, and their bed. The end.